When 74-year-old billionaire Robert Harrison collapsed in his Chicago lakefront mansion, his two sons Brandon and Tyler immediately contacted his attorney, fully expecting to split his $220 million fortune right down the middle. But when they sat down for the reading of the will 3 weeks later, they couldn't believe what they heard. Their father had left them virtually nothing and gave his entire estate to Max, his German shepherd. This is the unbelievable true story that made headlines across the country and changed how America thinks about inheritance forever. Robert Harrison didn't come from money, far from it. He was raised in a tiny apartment on the south side of Chicago by a single mother who worked as a waitress and cleaned offices at night to keep food on the table. Robert put himself through community college while working at a construction site during the day and driving a taxi at night, sleeping maybe 4 hours if he was lucky. By age 30, he'd saved enough to buy his first rental property, a rundown duplex that he fixed up with his own 2 hands. That one duplex turned into 5 properties, then 20, then an entire real estate empire that spanned 3 states. By the time he turned 55, Robert was worth over $200 million, owned a stunning mansion right on Lake Michigan, had vacation homes in Aspen and Miami, drove a collection of classic cars, and traveled on private jets. He'd married his high school sweetheart Jennifer, and together they raised 2 boys, Brandon, who was now 38, and Tyler, who was 35. When Jennifer died suddenly from a brain aneurysm 8 years ago, Robert's whole world fell apart. That's when his daughter's friend suggested he get a dog to help with the grief, and Robert brought home Max, a German shepherd puppy with intelligent brown eyes and a calm temperament. His sons were already grown and living their own lives by then, so it was just Robert and Max in that big house overlooking the water. But here's where everything started to go wrong, and I mean really wrong. As Robert's fortune grew over the years, his son's work ethic seemed to shrink in the opposite direction. Brandon, the older one, had dropped out of law school halfway through and decided he'd rather live off his father's success than build anything of his own. He bought a different luxury car every year, spent his summers in Europe partying with friends who didn't have real jobs either, and treated his father's money like an unlimited ATM machine. Tyler wasn't any better, and in some ways he was actually worse. He convinced his father to invest in 4 different business ventures over a 10-year period. A nightclub, a tech startup, a restaurant, and some kind of cryptocurrency thing that nobody really understood. And every single one of them failed spectacularly. The worst part wasn't even the money lost. It was that Tyler never once took responsibility or learned from his mistakes. He blamed the economy, his business partners, bad timing, anything except his own poor decisions and lack of dedication. But the real heartbreak for Robert was how rarely his sons came around in those final years of his life. Brandon lived just 40 minutes away in downtown Chicago, but he'd only show up maybe 3 or 4 times a year, usually on Christmas and his father's birthday, and even then he'd spend most of the visit checking his phone and talking about his next vacation. Tyler had moved out to San Diego and would go an entire year without visiting, maybe sending a text on Father's Day if Robert was lucky. The breaking point came when Robert was diagnosed with advanced diabetes and kidney problems about 2.5 years before he died. He called both sons on the same day he got the diagnosis, his hands shaking as he dialed their numbers, needing to hear their voices and feel like he still had family who cared. Brandon was at a golf resort in Scottsdale and said he'd try to come visit in the next few weeks. Those weeks turned into months and he never showed up. Tyler responded to his father's call with a voicemail because he didn't even pick up, and when he finally called back 3 days later, he talked for maybe 5 minutes before saying he had to run to a meeting. Meanwhile, Max never left Robert's side through any of it. The dog learned Robert's entire routine, knew when it was time for his medication, would rest his head on Robert's lap when the old man felt sick or sad, and slept right beside his bed every single night without fail. Robert's housekeeper, a kind woman named Maria who'd worked for the family for 15 years, later told reporters that she'd walked in on Robert crying alone in his study at least a dozen times, with only Max there lying at his feet, and that the dog seemed to understand his pain in a way his own children never did. Max became more than a pet. He was Robert's companion, his comfort, his loyal friend who asked for nothing but gave everything. Everything came crashing down on Robert's 72nd birthday. And this is the moment that changed the entire trajectory of his legacy. Robert had planned a special dinner at Gibson's Steakhouse, his favorite restaurant in the city where he'd celebrated every major milestone for the past 30 years. And he'd invited both Brandon and Tyler weeks in advance, even offering to fly Tyler in from California and put him up at a nice hotel. He wanted so badly to see his boys, to feel like he still had a family, to celebrate getting another year older with the people who were supposed to love him most. The reservation was for 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening, a table for 3 with a view of the city lights. Robert arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in his best suit, holding on to hope that this time would be different. Then the texts started coming in. Brandon sent a message at 5:30 saying something had come up with his girlfriend, and he couldn't make it. Robert later found out through a mutual friend that Brandon was actually at a blackjack table in Las Vegas that night. Tyler didn't even bother texting until 7:15, over an hour after dinner was supposed to start, with some excuse about missing his flight that Robert knew wasn't true because he'd offered to send the private jet. Robert sat at that table alone for 45 minutes, the waiters giving him sympathetic looks, other diners probably wondering why this well-dressed elderly man was sitting by himself on his birthday, until he finally ordered a steak to go and left. That night, sitting in his study with Max curled up beside his chair, Robert made a decision that had been building for years. The very next morning, before the sun was even fully up, Robert called his longtime attorney Stephen Cohen, who had been handling his legal affairs for over 25 years and knew the family history inside and out. "Stephen, I need you to come to the house today," Robert said, his voice steady and determined in a way Stephen hadn't heard in years. "I'm redoing my entire will, and I don't want to wait." Stephen drove over that afternoon, briefcase in hand, thinking maybe Robert wanted to adjust some percentages or add a charity. But when Robert laid out his plan, the lawyer actually sat back in his chair in shock. "Robert, listen, I understand you're hurt by your son's behavior, and honestly they should be ashamed of themselves. But this is incredibly drastic," Stephen said carefully, trying to be both honest and respectful. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? We're talking about your children here, your own flesh and blood." But Robert's mind was made up, and he'd never been more certain of anything in his entire life. "Stephen, I gave those boys every advantage I never had, the best schools, no student loans, connections, money whenever they needed it, and more importantly I tried to give them my time and love," Robert explained, and Stephen could hear the pain in his voice. "For the last 8 years since Jennifer died, they've shown me exactly who they are and what they value. And it's not me. The only one who's been there, who's loved me without wanting anything in return, who's given me a reason to get up in the morning, is Max. He deserves everything." Stephen tried one more time to get Robert to reconsider, suggesting maybe they write a letter to the sons first or set up a family meeting, but Robert refused. "I'm done begging my own children to act like they care about me," he said firmly. Over the next 5 weeks, Robert worked closely with Stephen and brought in 2 additional estate attorneys to make absolutely certain the will was bulletproof and couldn't be contested or broken after his death. Robert Harrison died peacefully on a gray Monday morning in November of 2021, sitting in his favorite chair overlooking Lake Michigan with Max lying beside him, just 2 months after his 74th birthday. The funeral was held at a small chapel, and ironically both Brandon and Tyler showed up this time, wearing expensive black suits and dark sunglasses, playing the role of devastated sons for the handful of people who attended. 2 weeks after the funeral, Stephen Cohen called both brothers and asked them to come to his downtown office for the official reading of the will. Brandon and Tyler sat in the leather chairs across from Stephen's mahogany desk, probably already mentally spending their inheritance and calculating how many millions each would receive. Stephen opened the thick folder, took a deep breath, and began reading the document that would change everything. The room went completely silent except for Stephen's voice. Here's what their father had left behind. To Max, the German Shepherd, a trust fund worth $218 million, the lakefront mansion with all furnishings, the vacation home in Aspen, and a full-time caretaker who would be paid $135,000 annually plus full benefits. The trust would cover all of Max's needs including premium organic dog food, regular veterinary care from the best animal hospital in Chicago, professional grooming every 2 weeks, and even dog massage therapy sessions twice a month. Max would keep his own bedroom in the mansion, the one right next to where Robert had slept. To Brandon Harrison, $75,000 and a sealed letter from his father. To Tyler Harrison, $75,000 and a sealed letter from his father. That was the entire will. Out of $220 million, each son received less than what their father used to spend on a single vacation. For a moment, nobody moved or said a word, like the information needed time to sink into their brains. Then Brandon absolutely exploded out of his chair, his face turning red with rage. This is completely insane. You can't leave a fortune to a dog. There's no way this is legal. Tyler started pacing the office, already talking about hiring attorneys and filing lawsuits, and getting the will thrown out. But Stephen calmly explained that the will had been reviewed by 3 separate law firms, that Robert had been examined by 2 different doctors who'd certified he was of completely sound mind and body when he signed it, and that everything was entirely legal under Illinois state law. Then Stephen opened the sealed letters and read them aloud, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Robert had written each son a personal message, and hearing their father's words from beyond the grave was absolutely crushing. He wrote about the loneliness of those last years, the birthdays spent alone, the phone calls that went unreturned, the desperate hope every time his phone rang that it might be one of them just calling to say hello. Robert wrote, "I spent my whole life building wealth so you boys would never struggle like I did. But somewhere along the way I failed to teach you that relationships matter more than money. Max gave me something you stopped providing years ago: loyalty, companionship, and love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. I hope someday you'll understand that what you've lost isn't the money, it's the time we could have spent together." The letters went on for 3 pages each, and by the end both brothers were sitting in stunned silence. Of course Brandon and Tyler didn't just walk away and accept their father's decision. Not even close. Within 3 weeks they'd hired Patterson and Mills, one of the most aggressive and expensive law firms in Chicago, and filed an official lawsuit to contest the will. Their argument was that Robert couldn't have been in his right mind, that someone must have manipulated him or exercised undue influence, that the whole thing was a product of grief and loneliness and not rational thinking, and that you simply can't leave an entire fortune to an animal. The case immediately became national news, and it spread like wildfire across every media platform imaginable. CNN ran segments about it. Fox News had debates with legal experts arguing both sides. The Chicago Tribune put it on the front page, and social media absolutely exploded with opinions. America was completely divided down the middle on this one. Thousands of people thought the sons had it coming and praised Robert for standing his ground against ungrateful children. Thousands of others thought Robert had gone way too far, and that the punishment didn't fit the crime, arguing that he should have tried family therapy, or at least had a real conversation with his sons before doing something so extreme. The hashtag #RichestDog started trending on Twitter and Instagram, with people posting pictures of their own pets with captions about loyalty. The trial began 8 months later and lasted for nearly a full year, filling a Chicago courtroom with attorneys, expert witnesses, family friends, employees, and curious observers who'd lined up outside hoping to get a seat. Brandon and Tyler's legal team brought in psychiatrists who'd never even met Robert to testify that his decision showed signs of depression and impaired judgment. They argued that isolating himself with only a dog for company was proof of mental decline. They painted a picture of a sad, lonely old man who wasn't thinking clearly in his final years. But Stephen Cohen and Robert's legal team were more than ready for this fight. They presented Robert's complete medical records showing he'd had regular checkups and cognitive tests, all of which came back showing he was mentally sharp right up until the day he died. They brought in Robert's personal physician who testified that Robert was one of the most clear-headed and intelligent people he'd ever treated. Maria, the housekeeper, testified for almost 3 hours about what she'd witnessed. The son's neglect, Robert's attempts to reach out, the countless times she'd seen him waiting by the phone hoping they'd call. They even presented cell phone records going back 5 years that showed exactly how rarely Brandon and Tyler had initiated contact with their father. The most damaging evidence came from the Gibson's steakhouse reservation system and security cameras, which confirmed that Robert had indeed sat alone at that table on his 72nd birthday, while his sons were nowhere to be found. After reviewing everything, the judge ruled decisively in favor of upholding the will. Robert Harrison had every legal right to distribute his assets however he chose, and there was overwhelming evidence that he'd been of sound mind and body when he made these decisions. The sons lost. They immediately filed an appeal, and lost again 6 months later. By the time all the legal fees were paid to their attorneys, the brothers' $75,000 inheritance was almost completely gone, and they'd spent nearly 2 years fighting a battle they never had any real chance of winning. Meanwhile, Max was living an absolutely incredible life that most humans could only dream about. The caretaker, a certified veterinary technician and dog trainer named Rebecca Chun who genuinely loved animals and took the job seriously, provided Max with extraordinary care and companionship. Max had his own Instagram account that exploded to over 1 million followers within the first year, with people from around the world following the daily adventures of the world's richest dog. He ate better than 99% of the population. Organic grass-fed beef, fresh salmon, vegetables prepared by someone who'd actually gone to culinary school, all approved by a veterinary nutritionist. He had regular wellness checkups every month, played in the mansion's massive yard overlooking the lake, took walks through Chicago's nicest parks, and yes, really did go to a luxury dog spa twice a month for massages and aromatherapy sessions. Rebecca posted photos of Max sleeping in sunbeams, playing with his favorite toys, and living out his days in comfort and peace. Max lived for 4 more wonderful years after Robert's death, eventually passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 12. And when he died, the internet genuinely mourned him. So what's the real lesson here? And why did this story capture America's attention so powerfully? Robert Harrison's story isn't actually about a billionaire and his dog at all. It's about something much deeper and more universal that affects families at every economic level. It's about the difference between transactional relationships and genuine connection, about how we treat the people who love us when we think there's nothing to gain, and about the consequences of taking family for granted. Robert spent decades building an empire, working 80-hour weeks and making sacrifices so his sons would have opportunities he never had. But somewhere in that process the boys learned to value the money more than the man who earned it. When Robert needed them most, during those final lonely years after losing his wife, they were nowhere to be found because there was nothing in it for them at that moment. Max, on the other hand, didn't care about Robert's bank account or his real estate portfolio or his fancy cars. The dog loved him when he was sad, when he was sick, when he was sitting alone in his study crying. And that's the kind of pure loyalty that money absolutely cannot buy. This case sparked a massive conversation across America that went way beyond this one family. Estate planning attorneys across the country reported a 40% increase in clients asking about pet trusts and alternative inheritance structures. Families that had been avoiding uncomfortable conversations about expectations and relationships suddenly started having those difficult, but necessary discussions around dinner tables. Psychologists and family therapists wrote articles pointing out that Robert's extreme decision, while unusual, highlighted a growing crisis. Adult children who maintain relationships with aging parents primarily out of financial interest rather than genuine love. Some experts praised Robert for having the courage to stand his ground and use his wealth to make a powerful statement about values and priorities. Others argued that he should have tried harder to communicate with his sons earlier, that he should have set clearer boundaries and expectations when they were younger, that cutting them off so completely was unnecessarily cruel. But here's the thing that gets lost in all the debate. Robert actually did try to maintain those relationships. He called, he invited them to dinner, he reached out when he got sick, he planned that birthday celebration hoping they'd show up. His sons made their choices over and over again for nearly a decade. And in the end they lost not just the money but any chance to make things right with their father before he died. The story serves as a wake-up call that our relationships with parents and family members shouldn't be transactional arrangements where we're just waiting for someone to die so we can collect. Your parents, your grandparents, the people who raised you and sacrificed for you. They won't be around forever, and one day you'll want more time with them and it'll be too late. The phone calls you make, the visits you plan, the effort you put into showing up when it's inconvenient. Those things matter infinitely more than whatever inheritance might be waiting. And Robert's story proves that assuming you'll get that money no matter how you behave is a dangerous and heartbreaking gamble. Now I want to hear what you think about this whole situation because I'm genuinely curious where you stand. Do you think Robert Harrison did the right thing by leaving everything to Max? Or did he take it too far and punish his sons more harshly than they deserved? Should Brandon and Tyler have gotten another chance to make things right? Or did they have plenty of chances already and blow every single one? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, because I read every one, and I love seeing different perspectives on these complicated family situations. If this story made you think differently about inheritance, family relationships, or how we treat the people who matter most, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories about wealth, family dynamics, and the unexpected decisions people make when they're running out of time. Next week I'm covering the unbelievable story of a grandmother who left her $3 million estate to her postal worker instead of her own grandchildren. And trust me when I say you absolutely need to hear what led to that decision. Share this video with someone in your life who might need to hear this message. Maybe someone who's been putting off calling their parents, or someone who's struggling with family expectations around money. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.